Racist cop. Hits black teen. Unaware. He's the mayor's only son. Yathurakarla. Chapter 1. A simple ride home. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm amber glow over Crescent Bay, a picturesque town where the streets were lined with blooming jacarandas. 17-year-old Jamal Carter pedaled his bike down Evergreen Avenue, his backpack bouncing rhythmically against his shoulders. The echoes of basketball practice still rang in his ears. The squeak of sneakers on the court, the sound of the ball meeting the net, and the encouraging words from Coach Mitchell. Jamal's dreams were big. He envisioned himself donning Stanford's crimson jersey, his name announced in stadiums as crowds cheered. His grades were impeccable, his discipline unmatched, and his mother, Mayor Regina Carter, his most steadfast supporter. But tonight, his mind was preoccupied with the essay he was drafting for an upcoming scholarship competition. What justice means to me. He thought about how justice was more than laws or courts. It was about dignity, equality, and understanding. Little did Jamal know, he was about to face an injustice that would test every belief he held. Chapter 2. A routine gone wrong. Officer Thomas Riggs sat in his squad car near the corner of Cedar Lane, sipping on a lukewarm coffee. A 10-year veteran of the Crescent Bay Police Department, Riggs was known for his gut instincts, a euphemism his peers used to excuse his pattern of racial profiling. His record was peppered with complaints from citizens, but none had ever stuck. As Jamal rode by, Riggs squinted at the teenager, his bias filling in a story that didn't exist. What's a kid like that doing in this neighborhood? Riggs thought, his hand moving to the switch for his patrol car's lights. He flipped them on, the red and blue flashing like an omen. Jamal heard the siren and slowed his bike, confusion etched across his face. He stopped at the curb, waiting as Riggs exited the car. "What's going on, officer?" Jamal asked, his voice steady but cautious. Riggs eyed him up and down. "You're riding through a restricted neighborhood. You got ID on you?" Jamal frowned. "Restricted? I live nearby. Don't get smart with me," Riggs snapped. "Step off the bike." Chapter 3. A harrowing encounter. Jamal complied, his mind racing through the advice his mother had drilled into him since he was a child. Stay calm, don't argue, keep your hands visible. Riggs snatched Jamal's backpack and began rifling through it, tossing out his basketball shoes, water bottle, and school notebooks onto the ground. "What are you looking for?" Jamal asked, his voice trembling with frustration. "Drugs, weapons, whatever you're hiding," Riggs replied smugly. "I'm not hiding anything," Jamal protested. "Quiet," Riggs barked. "Put your hands on the hood of the car." Jamal hesitated. "Why? I didn't do anything wrong." Riggs didn't wait for compliance. He grabbed Jamal by the arm, twisting it behind his back and slamming him against the patrol car. A sharp pain shot through Jamal's shoulder as he cried out. A small crowd began to gather, their phones raised, recording the scene. Among them was Mrs. Lopez, Jamal's former middle school teacher. She recognized him immediately and pushed through the crowd. "Officer, that's the mayor's son!" she shouted. Riggs froze, his grip tightening momentarily before he released Jamal. "The mayor's son?" he muttered, his face pale. Chapter 4. The Arrival of Power. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, and within minutes, the wail of sirens filled the air. A black SUV screeched to a halt, and the doors swung open. Out stepped Mayor Regina Carter, her expression a mix of fury and heartbreak. "Jamal!" she called, rushing to her son. She pulled him into a protective embrace, her eyes scanning the bruise forming on his arm. Her gaze then shifted to Riggs, who stood frozen, his authority crumbling under the weight of her glare. "Thomas Riggs," she began, her voice cold and commanding. "Explain yourself. Now." Riggs stammered. "Ma'am, I thought—" "You thought what?" she interrupted. That you could assault an innocent teenager because of the color of his skin? Riggs opened his mouth to speak, but Mayor Carter silenced him with a raised hand. You're suspended, effective immediately, and believe me, you will answer for this. Chapter 5. The Fallout. By morning, videos of the incident had gone viral, sparking outrage across the nation. News outlets ran the story on repeat. Racist cop assaults mayor's son. Protesters gathered outside the Crescent Bay Police Department demanding justice. At a press conference, Mayor Carter stood alongside Jamal, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. This isn't just about my son, she said. This is about every black child who has been unfairly targeted, every family who has suffered because of systemic racism. We will not stop until there is accountability and change. Chapter 6. A Fight for Justice. The Carter family's legal team filed a civil rights lawsuit against Riggs in the Crescent Bay Police Department. During the trial, Riggs's pattern of misconduct was laid bare. Witnesses testified about his history of targeting black residents, and the jury needed little time to convict him. Riggs was sentenced to community service and mandatory anti-bias training. But for Jamal, the fight didn't end there. Tucker. Chapter 7. From Victim to Advocate. Jamal used his platform to become a voice for change. He spoke at schools, community centers, and rallies, sharing his story and advocating for police reform. His essay on justice won the scholarship competition, and he was invited to speak at national conferences. The city implemented sweeping reforms, including body cameras for officers, mandatory anti-racism training, and the establishment of a civilian oversight board. Fakih. Epilogue. A Legacy of Change. Years later, as Jamal prepared to graduate from Stanford, he reflected on the incident that had changed his life. It was a painful chapter, but it had ignited a movement. In the end, justice wasn't just a word in an essay. It was a reality he had helped create.